Hello, how are you? Here we are once again. Now we are going to dedicate this little capsule to talk about risk inspections. What are they? What are they for? How are they done? What do you need to request a risk inspection? Risk inspections are basically the study that is requested, or the tool that risk takers have to evaluate how the risks are in their company, to evaluate how the risks are in their business. Basically, how does it start? It starts with a call. They say to us, "Hey Enrique, we need the engineer to do it." Typically we do it by specialties and so on, because it's not the same to look at a refinery as it is to look at a refinery, because it's not the same to see a refinery as it is to see a sugar mill or a car factory or a hydroelectric plant. So with this, someone is assigned to do the inspection. They come to an agreement with the client. First you discuss the clear objective of the inspection. It is always to identify risks. However, sometimes there are clients who already have ailment, let's say, with previous ailments. Suddenly we find a client who is having a very high accident rate due to such and such a thing. Another customer where there have already been 3 fires in 5 years, so the fire issue is more of a concern. Another client who has had claims and never feels satisfied with the claims indemnities. That is to say, there is a short discussion with the client where he expresses his main concerns and gives us as a more important focus of the inspection. He gives us the contacts of the people in charge of the facilities we are going to see. We then contact that person in charge and say, "Hey, 2 things. 1, we need you to send us a series of preliminary information so that we can get that information analyzed. And 2, we need you to tell us what day you can meet us at the facility and do a walkthrough." And do a walkthrough that typically, we are talking about a 10,000 square meter facility, will typically take 4 or 5 hours. 4 or 5 hours. We send the information request, that's the name of the document, to the client. This request for information typically asks for general characteristics of the facility, a description of the production process, a brief technical description of most of the equipment, especially large equipment, a brief description of all the personnel, a summarized resumes, let's say, of the personnel. The issue of human error will be discussed later, but it is very important. Location, the technical data sheets of the hazardous products they handle, a brief description of the firefighting system, some drawings, P&IDs, structural issues. We also ask for a lot of documents related to internal inspection processes, a lot of document related to internal maintenance processes, etc. And we give probably 2 or 3 weeks to the client to have that information. Once we get to the site, the first thing is a kick-off meeting, where we explain to all the people at the facility what we are going to do. It is very important that the focus of these inspections is not felt by the client as an audit. Rather, they should feel it as a work together to improve their risk conditions. Here we make them aware that the first thing we want is that there are no widows or widowers in the plant, that there are no losses due to accidents, that there are no unscheduled shutdowns, that there is no interruption of the entire business. Even the interruption of the whole business, which would put all the people out of work. Once we make them aware of this, we review all the missing information that was previously sent to us, so that if it is missing, we can take it with us at the end. A couple of client interviews are usually scheduled with the decisive people in the process. Who are these key people? Typically, we have a 30-minute interview with the plant manager. We usually also see the maintenance manager, the operations manager, the inspection manager, and if there is a safety area, the safety manager. These interviews can be at the beginning or during the inspection, because we proceed with the inspection. And we go through the inspection following a document called a checklist. These checklists contain all the aspects that are relevant to the inspection. We have a checklist for mines, another checklist for oil and gas, another one for energy, another one for process, another one for overland routes, another one for other. Depending on the line of business we go to, we have a different checklist. How are these checklists generated? Because they don't teach them anywhere, they don't teach them in any school. Basically, you generate them by reviewing all the regulations that govern each of the businesses we see. In a business, let's say a simple business such as a furniture factory or a factory or a plastic injection molding or whatever, normally it is regulated by Mexican regulations and that's where it stays. But for example, an oil and gas business is already very much regulated by standards called API, the American Petroleum Institute. Or in the middle of the very simple and very complex business, because there are many different lines of business, such as the hotel business, medicine and so on, which are already starting to be regulated in FDA, which is the US Fire Protection Agency. Although they are not standards that apply, they are already taken as good practices. So with that checklist, we go through the entire facility and we evaluate from aspects. We always go from larger risks to smaller risks. What is normally the main exposure to which our clients are exposed? Our clients are exposed to? Well, typically it's earthquake. If they are, especially in a very seismic area, and hurricane, obviously if they are close to the coast. Then how do we evaluate? How can we evaluate how vulnerable a business is to earthquakes? Well, if it is in a very exposed area, it has to be very well. If it is in an earthquake zone, it has to be very well built. If, for example, it is very exposed to hurricanes, it has to be very well protected against hurricanes. What are hurricanes? Perhaps you are wondering, how can I protect myself against a hurricane? Well, starting with a good embankment. That is to say that the whole installation is built with an embankment that gives it a large margin to avoid flooding. It is already a good. It is an adequate hurricane protection layer. It has a good drainage system, a very good hurricane protection layer, and so on and so forth. Windows, what kind of windows do you have, etc., 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 and so on and so forth. We go through all those aspects to give them a magnitude, to give you an idea of the magnitude. To give them a magnitude, to give you an idea of the magnitude of these checklists. So they can have typically between 500 or 600 reagents if it's a very deep inspection, and between 120 and 150 if it's a lighter inspection. There are inspections we handle 3 different levels of depth. There are some very light ones, especially when they are very large volume facilities. Imagine you are sent to check oxus. Well, there are 21,000 oxus. So you have to check a representative sample, but obviously you check a few things. Versus something very complex like a hydroelectric plant or a refinery or a large bridge or a refinery or a very large bridge or a mine, right? So there it obviously goes much deeper. Once, well, the tour is over, the missing information is reviewed, we thank all the team that collaborated in the inspection, and we return to the office. Once in the office, we verified all the information they gave us in the first lot before arriving in the second lot in the plant. All the findings that we determined in the inspection, all the photographs we took, all the additional tools that we used. A lot of times drone flights are used. Digital twins of high-density point clouds. Non-destructive testing, i.e. thermography, vibration measurements, thickness measurements, because all of that gives us information on the quality of the risk. Once we do all that, we generate a report. That report has the typical sections of a report, a general inspection section, then a risk identification section, another section on layers of protection, that is, all these risks were identified. But does the client have or does not have all these layers of protection that mitigate those risks? There is also a very important section of recommendation section where we issue a series of recommendations, where we find what is called a risk instance. We issue a recommendation that is oriented that this instance of risk be reduced. We will talk about these recommendations another day, about how they are generated, how they are catalogued, how they are handled, but they remain as a very important part of the report. And the most important thing for the reinsurer, because we are talking about reports of 50 to 60 pages, which many times a reinsurer in London or in Germany does not even have time to read it. This is the most important part of the report. It is, as always, the executive summary, the conclusion section, the recommendation section, and obviously some graphics where possible. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. We believe in that. So many times photographs give a very good idea of what you are looking at, of what you are seeing. This report is sent to the end client. The final client sees that we have complied with the approach, etc. And he gives us the go-ahead, and then the risk inspection report is considered closed. The risk inspection report is considered closed, which is the subject of this video. So, to recapitulate, a risk taker asks us to carry out an inspection. This inspection can have 3 different levels of depth. Based on that level of depth and specialty, an engineer is assigned. The engineer calls the client, asks for a request for information, gives 1 or 2 weeks to get it, arrives at the facility, checks that all the information is available. A series of interviews are held with people who are critical to the safety issues of the process, which we said are typically the general director, the general manager, the maintenance manager, the safety manager, the inspection manager, and those are. After that, a tour of the plant is made. We see absolutely all the areas. This tour is done with a checklist, which is a guide that we generate based on national and international standards. National and international standards, whichever applies. We return to a meeting room and close the visit. A report is made in the office afterwards. That report has a general description of the client, of the processes, an important area of exposure of this customer, as I mentioned before, to different loss generators such as hurricanes, earthquakes, fire, etc. Hurricanes, earthquakes, fire, etc., human error. Then there is another important section of layers of protection or risk mitigators. An area of recommendations, which are these sections oriented to reduce risk. And a very important area of executive summary with conclusions, which is where we try to encompass all the findings of the inspection. Findings of the inspection. I just need to say when we are asked for it. Normally we are asked for it either in policy renewal processes or to acquire clients when we are trying to find new clients. So, well, I think that's it. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us and we will be happy to answer them. Thank you very much. See you next time.